Delighted to welcome you once again. Thank you for your efforts.
I'm going to burble a bit too. So, first of all, for those who don't know anything about me, I've been chairman of the IIMS Certifying Authority since 2011 or something. I spent 25 years running boat building businesses and small shipyards and building boats under Lloyd's survey, building boats under Department of Transport survey, building boats under DNV survey, building boats under MCA survey. We built in my family's business here one of the very first workboats built under the 1998 Workboat Code. I was involved in the Isle of Wight when some of the first fox cubs or fox terriers were built under the coloured codes in 1993 or 4. I have worked with class and flag rules and regulations for a long time. This is, along with the Workboat Code, new Workboat Code, these two codes are the most complicated, difficult codes to understand, work your way through and find out what you actually are supposed to do as a surveyor that I have ever encountered. So there's a start. Everything has changed. So maybe not quite everything, but I've gone through this code in as much detail as I can. I wrote and IIMS submitted something like 30 pages of comment and critique on the consultation version to the MCA. Quite a lot has changed from the consultation version to the published version, and MCA unfortunately have told us that they're not able to give us a record of exactly what has changed. But in preparing this PowerPoint, I worked through the 30 odd pages we had submitted, point by point. I looked at where all those came in now to the published code.
Delighted to welcome you once again. Thank you for your efforts.
I'm going to burble a bit too. So, first of all, for those who don't know anything about me, I've been chairman of the IIMS Certifying Authority since 2011 or something. I spent 25 years running boat building businesses and small shipyards and building boats under Lloyd's survey, building boats under Department of Transport survey, building boats under DNV survey, and there just are. Almost every section of this code has changed, and everything that's changed is changed in a manner that makes it more difficult to understand and more difficult to work with. So I have just put at the bottom of this slide, read the code again and again and take it to every survey because you'll have to. So this code replaces yellow code, blue code, red code, and MGN 280. So for the first time, once the new code becomes applicable to your vessel, it will be applicable, and those old codes will no longer be able to be used in their entirety. There are areas in the new code where what are classed as existing vessels are allowed to refer back to certain elements of the previous code they were certificated under. But that is all point by point. There is no overall grandfathering right or ability to move from an old code to the new one. So just a bit of background. Sport and Pleasure Code is enabled by Statutory Instrument 2025 number 1195, Merchant Shipping Vessels and Commercial Use for Sport and Pleasure Regulations 2025. Those regulations also cover large yacht codes, which we don't deal with as under 24-meter certifying authorities. In the bump we will send out at the end of this presentation, you will get that statutory instrument if you don't already have it. Code of practice from that SI. So it's worth reading some of the things in the SI as well as the code itself. We talk quite often about whether M notices are relevant, whether they have legal standing, whether they're actually part of the code or not. The statutory instrument says code of practice means in relation to a small vessel, this sport or pleasure code, and includes a reference to any document amending or replacing that code, which is considered by the Secretary of State to be relevant from time to time and specified in a merchant shipping notice. So if merchant shipping notices, M notices come out in relation to this new sport or pleasure code, we will have to take those M notices on board and deal with the content of them. Who does it apply to? So most people probably know this, and this hasn't really changed from previous codes, but worth just reiterating. Sport and Pleasure Code applies to UK registered vessels in commercial use for sport or pleasure. Actually, it also applies to UK based and operated but not registered vessels. And it also applies to non-UK vessels if they're registered and flagged overseas. If they are based in a UK port and operating in the UK, the code applies to them. Then there are different details to do with how we have to prepare the certificate and the SCV2 for an overseas vessel in UK waters, but the code is still applicable. Again, just briefly, it doesn't apply to vessels operating underwater, doesn't apply to hovercraft, doesn't apply to vessels carrying cargo. So all the way through this code, it refers to a maximum of 1,000 kilos of activity equipment, not cargo. So this is from the MCA's own press release and what they thought they would like to say about the code. They say it is a single consolidated code for all vessels in commercial use for sport or pleasure. They say it updated technical standards for construction stability and equipment. They say that it has provisions for hybrid and electric propulsion systems. It has clearer requirements for examinations and certification, and I agree with that. It also, and I've highlighted that bit, has enhanced safety management and risk assessment obligations. And those are quite detailed obligations, which will now be incumbent on owners and operators to follow and on certifying authorities to check. I'm avoiding using the word audit, and that'll become apparent towards the end why, but we do have to look at safety management systems and risk assessments.
Razor, Mike, just before you crack on, question from Simon in the chat. What about the other red ensign flags, Gibraltar, BVI, Cayman Islands, etc.? Does it apply too?
Yes, I'm sure it does. Just didn't say it in the bit I was cutting and pasting from there, but yes. Well, I'm not quite sure it does. Actually, we need to look at each of them point by point. They do not just automatically conform to UK regulations. Gibraltar particularly has their own regulations which stand alongside the UK regulations. So actually we need to look at each of these red ensign group states and see exactly what they've said, and I have not done that as yet. Back to existing vessels. So what constitutes an existing vessel under this code is very important. Existing vessels with valid certificates can continue operating under transitional arrangements. They must comply with updated requirements at renewal of certification, modification, or within 3 years, whichever is. So, broadly speaking, broadly speaking, you have operators have either 3 years after this code came into force, or up till their first 5-year renewal after the date the code came into force to become compliant. That's the first step. Then the second step is that if they are considered as existing vessels under this code, then that gives them the opportunity to capitalize on various specific grandfathering rights detailed point by point in the new code. If they are not existing vessels, they cannot do that. So what constitutes an existing vessel is pretty important for vessels that are generally in common language you would think of as existing vessels. So new vessel, keel of which was laid or construction or layup started after the first day on which this code came into force, and that has not held a valid code certificate in the last 5 years. So a code came into force on the 12th of December 25. Existing vessels, those which have held a valid certificate under blue, yellow or red codes or MGN 280 within the last 5 years. But in the back of the new code, in one of the annexes or appendix or whatever, it also says that vessels with keels laid or which were at a similar stage of construction between the entry into force of MGN 280 and the entry into force of the Sport and Pleasure Code may be considered existing vessels. So that says that if a vessel had its keel laid, MGN 280 I think was October 2004. So if a boat was built essentially between 2004 and 2025, it can be considered an existing vessel, and therefore it can take on board some of the grandfathering rights under the new code. So we've had questions asked by various operators and surveyors who have boats that were partway into the certification process on the 12th of December when this code came into force. what to do if the guy's already submitted his SCV1, if part of the survey's been done, or even if part of the survey hasn't been done, but you're the surveyor, you've started to look at it, you've had the vessel details, the SCV1 application is raised and the process is started, you have to start all over again, or what? So we asked that question directly of the code vessel branch, and they came back with this answer. So the first paragraph is just what it says in the back of the code, that they said this would apply where a vessel has started certification process but not yet completed it. That vessel would still be subject to the same requirement for transitioning to the new code within 3 years or by the next renewal examination. So if a boat has started the coding process before 12th December 25, we would consider that it can be treated as an existing vessel and will therefore be able to take forward certain grandfathering rights. Yeah, so that's just a bit about when it becomes applicable, which we've talked about already. There seems to be a change to sea area categories for sea area category 5 only. I hope I've got this right, but I think I have. I looked at it 3 times. MGN 280 says category 5 is 20 miles from a nominated departure point. Sport and Pleasure Code says it's 3 miles from land or 3 miles from either the point of departure to sea or the seaward boundary of categorised waters in favourable weather. So for boats that are operating shorter distances to sea, it might be in category 4, 5 or 6 or something that needs looking at and thinking about. So I've only just put this bit in because one of the codes that this code replaces is the so-called intended pleasure vessel code, which was for vessels which really were only going to be pleasure vessels, but which could technically be considered to be operating commercially if they were being sea trialed by a surveyor, sea trialed by a yard, taken out for demonstration by a broker, various reasons why a vessel was no longer operating strictly under the terms of the definition of a pleasure vessel, and we had the intended pleasure vessel code. So that has been replaced by this new sport and pleasure code. In the MCA PR blurb, it said they had clarified some of the detail of certification and survey and examinations. So in the definitions in the code, under annual examination, strangely, it does talk about annual examination, but the bit I've put in here, which is under that heading in the code, is that hull shell, fittings, external steering, propulsion parts are to be examined out of water at intervals not exceeding 5 years. That's just as was before, but certifying authority may stipulate lesser interval in consideration of vessel hull construction, material, age, or vessel type. So in the various drafts of this code before final publication, it was drafted that all vessels over 20 years age would be subject to more detailed and more regular surveys. And that's been taken out, but it's taken out and balanced by saying that the certifying authorities have to now look more closely. So we do need to look more closely at individual vessels as both the surveyors, the scrutineers and the CA, and see whether there is anything to do with the material, age, vessel type or service that really would, in common practical sense, mean that it should be looked at and surveyed more often. So just that, we need to think about it. We've got new types of vessels, pardon me, Group 1 and Group 2 vessels, which we'll come on to shortly. A compliance examination. So your very first off code examination, and probably also the renewal examination, but certainly the compliance examination. Part of the examination should be out of the water, part should be in water. The old codes always said that part of the examination should be out of water, and which you could have taken from that common sense that part of it also needed to be in the water. But it had been quite common for boats to be surveyed only out of the water at compliance and renewal. It's now spelled out in black and white that it has to be both. What's the next bit? Okay, but except that for a vessel with no through hull fittings below waterline, certifying authority may exercise discretion by conducting the compliance examination out of water only. you have to think about what hull fittings means. It doesn't just mean skin fittings for valves and things like that. Rudders, stern gear, anything through the hull is a hull fitting. So that needs thinking about. But it may be the case that smaller boats such as rigid inflatables and things which have just that, no hull fittings, still can have their examination out of water only. There's a whole lot more detail in this code about reporting incidents. And so the first part of that has to come from the owners and operators. We can't respond as surveyors to anything if we don't know about it. But what we do about it is hardened up and explained in more detail. If a vessel is involved in an incident affecting safety, owner or master to report as soon as practicable to the CA. Incident is defined: collision, accidental grounding, fire, other events that endanger or would endanger safety of vessel occupants, other persons or environment. Any incident involving hull, keel attachments, keel internal structure, rudder, any fitting below the waterline, propulsion system, sails, rigging, machinery, steerage, equipment. So if they tore a sail, they're supposed to tell you, and you'd have to decide whether you're supposed to look at it and survey it or not. You might decide if it was a sail, that's okay, but if they tore a sail, did anything else happen at the same time? So all much more detail, and therefore needs thinking about in more detail. The survey or inspection we make after an incident or damage is now defined as an emergency examination. When the report is made, the certifying authority shall decide as soon as possible if an emergency examination is required. So most commonly, the owner or operator will phone their surveyor and tell them what's happened, unless, of course, the surveyor has already found out through the grapevine and is waiting to hear from them. If an examination is required, does it have to be in water or out of water? Tell the owner and master. And so surveyor doing all that is acting as part of the certifying authority, is not acting entirely on his own behalf. So all that needs to be kind of geared together. But often the certifying authority can't make any reasonable decision until the surveyor has made one, and often the surveyor can't make one until he's been and seen the boat or talked about it or done something. But I expect MCA audits are going to start boring into all this and checking on exactly how we've recorded that we've done all this. So we'll have to look at it in more detail. This came up in conversation the other day, and I've just kind of stuck in here for a bit of thinking about. Says vessel with a valid certification for a specific design category under RCR can be considered suitable for operation in various sea areas as per this table. I'm not sure if that can really be looked at in isolation. That probably needs thought about along with what evidence you get of its RCD compliance and whether you've got the EU or RCR type approval certificate and builder's certificate and things like that. Needs a bit of thinking about. Gone through this just in the sequence it comes up in the code, so it's not all absolutely linked together under the headings it might be. Risk assessment appropriate to the intended operation by owner-operator to ensure any circumstances, local conditions or equipment not covered by provisions of the code are adequately considered. This risk assessment shall be presented to the certifying authority as part of the examinations prior to issuing or renewing the certificate. I think we still have quite a lot of clarification to do with the MCA on what we are supposed to do about safety management systems, risk assessments and things. We'll come on to more of that later, either in this session or separately. There are risk assessments stated in the code as being subject to certifying authority approval. There are risk assessments that are only stated as being required to be presented to the certifying authority. So do we then have to approve them or not? And there are risk assessments where it just says they have to exist. So does the certifying authority then have to look at them or not? And that'll all tie in with the safety management system and to what extent we are required to check that more later. New concept of Group 1 and Group 2 vessels. Group 1, 15 or fewer persons, sea area 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6. Annual examination can be by owner or managing agent. Group 2, that's not to say it must be, but it can be, may have annual examination by owner or managing agent. Group 2, 16 or more persons and or sea area 0 or 1. Requires surveyor examination annually. But there's more to do with all that coming up. certifying authority has discretion to reassign a vessel if it believes it's required by the vessel's operation usage history or when the vessel's age becomes a contributing factor. So a vessel that might, in paper, be Group 1 annual examination, certifying authority has the discretion to reassign to Group 2 and require annual examination if it thinks fit. And note, which I mentioned already, the consultation of the version of the code required surveyor annually on all vessels once 20 years old. So the MCA are thinking about whether older vessels need more regular inspection. In our response, we said we thought it wasn't reasonable to ask all 20-year-old boats, because some 20-year-old boats are very well built, very well maintained, and looking at them twice in 5 years is probably fine. Some newer boats are not so well built, not so well maintained, and probably do need looked at every year. So certifying authorities now need to decide that. We probably have to decide that on a case-by-case basis. We probably have to record in the SCV too what we've decided, so that is all managed and available to the MCA to audit the management of. Intermediate examinations, all by a surveyor, so no change there. But Group 1 vessel, intermediate, shall be in water. Certifying authority may also require out of water. So we have to think about that, decide if or how we're recording that. A Group 2 vessel, the intermediate, which might previously have been only in water, a Group 2 vessel shall be both in water and out of water. So if we flick back to Group 2 vessel, 16 or more persons in sea area 0 or 1, the intermediate for that has to be both in and out of water. So owners of boats in that situation are going to have more lifts to pay for and more survey costs probably. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, it's just what's happening. All renewal examinations by the surveyor. Renewals to be both out of and in water. So again, there have been boats, I've done boats where I was perfectly satisfied to complete the survey out of water and think that was okay. I've done entirely adequate inspection. That's no longer okay. So in my part of the world where I often have to travel 2, 3, 4 hours to get to a boat, unless they can get it lifted out and in the same day and do both surveys in a day, and I perhaps have to go back twice. My time, so owners' costs. Again, not saying it's right or wrong, but that's now more fully defined and it's what it says in the code. Repairs and modifications. So some certifying authorities have been doing this, some have not really. It now says repairs and modifications are to be recorded on the vessel and the CA copies of the SCV too. And we have to record not just the repairs and modifications, we have to record the surveys. So that's was normal already. You signed off the annual survey, but if you went to do a damage survey or an inspection or something, any survey now has to be recorded on the SCV too. Inspection of repairs and any replacements or modifications. So it changes his engine or changes batteries or anything of any sort of significance, supposed to be recorded in the SCV too. It may be issued as an addendum to the SCV too. So certifying authorities will all have to think about how to handle that in the most convenient fashion. Storm sails, a lot more detail. So sea area 0, a trysail and a storm jib. Area 1, 2, or 3, trysail or main reefing to reduce loft length by at least 50% and a storm jib. So I think that 50% reduction is different. And I think that used to be a deep reef that was considered a deep reef if it was 65%. We've got sea area 4, 5, or 6 not required to carry storm sails. And then we've got details of what constitutes a storm jib or a trysail. A storm jib maximum loft length 65% of 4 triangle height. Storm jib area not more than 5% of 4 triangle height squared. So somebody's going to present all that information, either measured by the surveyor or confirmed by a sailmaker or something, to confirm that the storm sail is now complying with specific requirements rather than just being there. Trysail area, not more than 17.5% of mainsail hoist times foot length. Trysail area, not going to read it all out, you'll get the PowerPoint, but you get the point. Details of storm sails are now spelled out and have to be checked and recorded somehow or other. sailing vessel additional inspections. Surveyor detailed visual inspections at least once every 5 years of keel and method of attachment to hull, internally, either in or out of water, and externally out of water. Detailed visual inspection of rudder and method of attachment to hull, of steering system, to include bearing area for damage of stress cracks, rudder, stalk and blade, any joins in the stalk, upper connections to hull and deck, tip deflection tests. So we're probably going to have forms to record these inspections on, either as tick box or tick box with additional wording if wording is required. Probably a tick box won't do. Surveyor to submit detailed inspection report to the certifying authority. CA may require more frequent examinations due to vessel nature and use. So more detailed inspection, maybe everybody was doing that level of inspection, but the code has not previously required us to record it, and certainly not to record it in detail. So more work, more recording, more cost. Additional detail about lifting, swing or canting keels. So canting keels might be a bit unusual, swing keels might be a bit unusual, but we are coming across them. Lifting keels are not so unusual. Minimum additional inspections to include no significant stress cracks in structure around pins supporting the keel, so hinge pins. No significant stress cracks in structural arrangement for keel lifting. No extensive corrosion to pins, cylinders or supporting structure. So how you establish that the hinge pin a keel is swinging on has no extensive corrosion without taking that pin out to inspect it, I don't quite know. But that's what it says we have to do. Structural strength. So certificate of construction or equivalent documentary evidence issued in accordance with hull certification standards for small vessels recognised by UK Load Line Assigning Authority. So class certificate or equivalent document, that hasn't changed. Certificate of construction or equivalent documentary evidence in accordance with small craft hull certification standards verified by an approved notified body. So that was our EU RCD Declaration of Conformity and Builder's Certificate. And we have debated between certifying authorities and between certifying authorities and the MCA over a period of years whether the module of RCD that was used was relevant and whether you could have module A1, which were all, at least to some degree, builder self-certification or not. Now clarified that you can't do that. You have to have one of the modules that it has at least a first of type verified by an approved or notified body and a builder's certificate for the rest.
Fraser, it's Mike, just butting in. One or two people have posted some questions in chat, which thinking about it is not a bad thing because I will gather all of those at the end when we download the video. So we could then pick those up and deal with those over the coming days. So I'm just going to say if everyone wants to or anyone's got a burning question, pop it up in the chat. We'll pick that up and we'll come back to it next week if that's all right, Fraser.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do it for the purposes of today. We will, I think you and I discussed, Mike, we will, once this kind of quick overview is done, we will be running further sessions honing in on some of the detail of all this and some of the detail that needs most looked at. So if we've got questions, we can either answer them when we get them or as and when we deliver further sessions. So structural strength, safe history, still permitted but tightened up. Your individual vessel has a record of at least 5 years history, no longer just of safe operation, but also of maintenance and safe operation in an area where sea and weather is no less severe than likely to be encountered. So when the owner presents his boat saying, I've been operating for 5 years, and you might previously just have accepted that, and then we were getting more into having to have some form of record or log or something of that safe operation, we're now being told we have to have history of maintenance as well as safe operation. So owner's maintenance records are going to be necessary, and that might be detailed or it might be less so, but we're going to have something. So on the other hand, we do have slightly opening up insofar as you can also have safe history if the individual vessel has a sister vessel which is an existing code vessel with an age date within 5 years of the age date of the individual vessel, and that sister vessel has a valid certificate for the same intended sea area as the vessel you're about to code. So you can base safe history on a sister vessel. Quite how you then tie in the maintenance requirement of the first paragraph with that, I don't know. But both options exist. Structural strength still. So existing code certificate, load line or load line exemption certificate. Structural strength is acceptable if at the date of entry into force of the Sport and Pleasure Code, the vessel has either small commercial vessel certificate number blue, yellow, red, or MGN 280 for the sea area it will operate in, or a valid workboat for the sea area it will operate in, or a valid load line or load line exemption certificate for the sea area and weather conditions likely to be encountered in the sea area it will operate. Construction materials, HDPE, now allowed with some restrictions. Allowed wood, GRP, FRP, aluminium alloy, steel, HDPE, or combinations of such materials, except that battery hybrid or battery electric propulsion vessels shall not be HDPE. Vessels of HDPE with battery electric outboard motor fully self-contained may be considered on a case-by-case basis subject to the approval of the MCA. So, not the approval of the certifying authority. If it's got any kind of electric propulsion, it's either not allowed, or if it's an outboard, we've got to get the MCA to accept it. Structural strength of watertight bulkheads. So there's actually a bit more about bulkheads generally that I haven't put in here we'll need to look at. But one of the things which is actually just common sense is that when watertight bulkheads are required, such as for damage stability, the strength of the watertight bulkhead or the effectiveness of any alternative means of demonstrating that damage stability compliance shall be adequate for intended purpose and approved by the certifying authority. So a boat requires damage stability if it's got watertight bulkheads. The fact that there's a bulkhead there, the fact that it might have a watertight door in it and that you've checked the watertight door and seen that it works and seen that its seals are good and things like that is no longer enough. We now need to approve the structural strength of the bulkhead to be sure that if one of the compartments is brimful to the deck with water, the bulkhead isn't just going to burst and spill the water through into the next one. So that is clearly logical sense, but it hasn't been a specific written requirement until now. Valves and associated piping stuff has changed. So plastic or flexible piping shall not contribute any additional risks or spread of fire and shall be suitable for the intended purpose. So you can take that sort of reasonable. Flexible pipes, hoses, and hose assemblies shall be as short as practical and practicable, generally not more than 1.5 meter long. So this is in the section of the code to do with pipes and hoses and things. It doesn't specifically say whether it's seawater hoses. It doesn't specifically say whether it's hoses connected to a skin fitting. It doesn't specifically say whether it's fuel hoses. It applies to all flexible hoses. Where a flexible section of piping is used, connections shall be screw type or equivalent. So what does that mean? If it's got a ribbed spigot pushed into the end with hose clip on it and that spigot is threaded and therefore makes a threaded connection, is that a threaded connection or is it not a threaded connection because it's got a spigot that the flexible hose is pushed onto with a hose clip? So a bit of thinking about. Flexible pipes and end attachments shall be of approved fire resisting materials. I'll just put here, so no full length flexible hoses. So I have boats coded where they had metal fuel lines, copper fuel lines corroding, having to replace them. We've just replaced them all in flexible because it's more corrosion resistant and probably a better job. You might not now be able to do that. You're looking at thinking about plastic pipes not used in machinery spaces for flammable or for flammable liquids unless they meet various ISO 7840s that common one we've referred to in the past. They're insulated. It's exhaust hosing, so that's kind of always been the base for hoses connected to skin fittings. It no longer says specifically that it has to be for hoses connected to skin fittings. It just says it. You have to kind of decide whether it still means the same thing or not. We don't quite know. Shut-off valves. Requirements to be operable from outside the machinery space would have previously been all shut-off valves. Now it's saying that it's only relevant in category C area or 1. In category C area 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6, a shut-off valve may be located on the pipe within the machinery space. Not quite sure what the benefit of that might be, but that's what it says. Machinery shutdown. All vessels shall have a reliable means to manually override and shut down propulsion machinery. So That's in the event of an emergency, risk to persons or mechanical failure. And I'm not quite sure what manually means there. Is a pull stop cable manual, or is it only manual if you go to the engine and operate the stop lever on the engine? But that's what it says, so it needs clarification and thinking about going forward. Kill cords. So kill cords now apply to ribs, buoyant collar boats, open boats, or any vessel where there is a risk of helmsperson falling overboard. Shall be fitted with a kill cord, securely attached to the helmsperson and used at all times. So an open launch with a 16 horsepower inboard diesel doing 6 knots. Does that now require a kill cord or not? I'm not quite sure. But the bit for operators that is key here says it's to be securely attached to the helmsperson and used at all times when the engine or electric motor is running in gear and vessel is making way. So we've got the code specifying how operators will operate on board, as well as specifying survey regimes. There are new requirements regarding hazardous spaces. I need to look at that more closely, and that will probably need to be subject of a separate session. Of me. Hold on a second. So somebody raised a question not long ago about whether an engine room was specifically a hazardous place, and I would have not thought that it was, although it potentially could be in certain circumstances. But we will do more on hazardous spaces later. For now, we're just drawing attention to the fact that they are now required to be thought about in terms of the code. Fuel shutoffs. Highlighted what I think are the key changes there. Fuel shutoff isolation points to be clearly labelled. Where outboard engines have a requirement to have a shutoff, but that is now to be away from the engine. If a closure is remote operated, it's to have a manual override. So I don't quite know what that means. It needs thinking about. There's more on this later to do with fire protection and things. Flexible fuel pipes. Permitted where necessary for movement and vibration between fixed pipes and fuel tanks for fuel consumers. That's what it says. So it suggests we can't have flexible fuel pipes other than short lengths connecting copper, steel, or stainless steel to tanks and engines and things. Flexible fuel pipes are to be renewed per manufacturer's instructions and after inspection or due to condition. Date of fitting and date of renewal to be recorded on the SCV too. If manufacturer's instructions say pipes do not need renewing, the SCV to note no renewal date required by manufacturer. So manufacturer probably won't produce instructions that say pipes do not need renewing. They'll just either have instructions saying something is needed or they won't have instructions. So that's going to be difficult to comply with. Previous requirements for suitability for fuel and fire resistance remain. Pipes carrying flammable liquids or gases into or through accommodation space. To me, that adds difficult requirements and requires clarification. It says pipes are to be solid drawn copper or stainless steel and as short as possible. It says if they're over 25mm diameter, they have to be fully welded sleeves. So I'm not sure you can have a welded sleeve in a copper pipe. Could have it in stainless steel. If they're under 25mm, joints are to be steel compression fittings. So I'm not quite sure you can use a steel compression fitting on a copper pipe. So that needs looking at a bit. And it tells us that pipe systems are to be tested to 1.5 times working pressure or 3 bar, whichever is the greater, subject to satisfaction of the certifying authority. Doesn't tell us when they're to be tested, who they're to be tested by. It doesn't say whether it's annual, once in a vessel's life, once every 5 years. So some clarification required. For existing vessels, not required to comply with 814.1, but if piping is replaced, altered, or modified, it should comply. All battery charging systems shall be fitted with circuitry to prevent overcharging and overvoltage and shall have an indicator that shows the level of charge. So we put in our response to the consultation version that not all small boats with inboard or outboard engines necessarily have a charge indicator. They might have a light that tells you whether it's charging or not charging. So it now says that all battery systems shall have a charge indicator showing the level of charge. Battery isolation. Maybe I've got this wrong in my mind, but I think what's written is not often what we're going to find. A battery disconnect switch shall be provided to simultaneously isolate all non-earthed poles. So if you've got a fiberglass boat that's got a fully insulated 2-wire system, it doesn't have earthed poles. So it's saying you're supposed to have simultaneous isolation. So that, to me, that is double pole isolation. And double pole isolation is expensive, heavy, and difficult, not fitted on most boats. It's not the same as an isolator on each pole, and it's certainly not the same as one single pole isolator on the positive terminal. So how we're going to deal with that is going to need a bit of sorting out and clarifying. Ventilated batteries to have drip trays to adequately contain electrolyte spillage. So if it's a plastic box and the box is big enough, that might be all right, and it's a ventilated battery. So if it's a sealed type battery, it doesn't apply. Apologise for the dangerous daisies. Dangerous gases may possibly occur in a battery space. The space shall be ventilated. So what does possibly occur mean? If a sealed battery overcharges and boils and fails somehow, it can discharge gases. Does it mean that, or did it just mean non-sealed type lead acid batteries? And how that relates to lithium batteries needs thinking about. So there's more detail. The system shall be designed such that dangerous gases cannot re-enter the battery space. So battery ventilation is going to need a bit more thinking about and consideration, and we don't have all the answers yet. Battery gas spark protection, so that's my title, but if mechanical means are employed to ventilate a battery compartment, components must not be a potential source of ignition. So that is reasonable and sensible, and we used to fit fans with spark arrested fans and things like that. But we've got reference to ATEX regulations and things like that we now have to look into and think about. Oh, don't know why that's a blank slide. That might be something we have to come back to. Fields of vision. Can you see where you're going? So used to say, what was there adequate visibility from the helm position? Now we've got a whole bunch of detail about that. Sufficient horizontal and vertical visibility required from main control or steering position in all load conditions to avoid impeding the proper lookout required by the call regs. An ISO standard for field of vision. Existing vessels transitioning from blue, yellow, or red code not required to comply. So we'd have to have that ISO standard. We'd have to see what it said, or we'd have to have the builder's certificate, the EU RCD or RCR first of type certificate with the tick box sheet, and that would have to have on it that ISO 11591 was complied with. Existing vessels are not required to comply with this provision, but if it's an existing vessel, it doesn't comply, there has to be a sign saying so. So more details, more signage. Bilge pumping. No portable bilge pumps. A bilge pump shall be permanently installed, self-priming and capable of operation with all access ways closed. So my note, portable bilge pumps no longer okay, because they are used sometimes to make up the second means of pumping compartments in catamarans with 6 or 7 compartments in each hull, for example, and things like that. So no portable bilge pump, so you're going to have to mount the pump. But if it's a pump is permanently installed and it has wandering leak hoses, to me that's probably okay. Then it's got a requirement that applies to permanently installed bilge pumps. But since the requirement above says all pumps shall be permanently installed, this must apply to all pumps. Permanently installed bilge pump shall be fitted with a bilge suction valve of a non-return type. So typically on vessels I look at, bilge discharges have non-return valves on the hull side. That's not the suction side, that's the discharge side. So we're going to have a non-return valve in the suction side of the pump, possibly down in the bilge somewhere that you can't easily get to it to maintain it. Not quite sure why that's a good idea, but that's what it says. Auto start bilge pumps. So it used to just be that engine rooms, engine machinery spaces were not allowed to have automatic bilge pumps. Now we've got A vessel fitted with auto-start bilge pumps in spaces that contain potential pollutants, so that's your machinery space with oil in the bilges, contained underneath the engines and things. Auto-start bilge pumps shall be fitted with a filtration system or periodically monitored. So we put in the consultation that we thought that was a bit of a move away from moving from you can't have them to you can have them as long as you check them sometimes. And if you give the owner the option of paying for and installing a filtration system or saying that he checks his bilges regularly, I expect most are going to say, well, I just check the bilges now and again. But that to me means auto-start bilge pumps in an engine or similar space are now allowed as long as periodically monitored. I would think that would mean that the monitoring shouldn't be covered by the vessel safety management system. But I don't think it is specified in the MCA's detail of what constitutes a safety management system. Stability, weight of a person. So same as Workbook Code 3, weight of a person has gone up from 75 kg to 82.5 kgs, except that for existing vessels transitioning from MGN 280 yellow, red or blue codes, a person may continue to be considered as 75 kilos, except that where that vessel has its stability reassessed after major modifications, the new stability assessment shall be conducted in line with the Sport and Pleasure Code, i.e. 82.5 kilos. And there are requirements in the stability section about when a vessel's stability has to be reassessed. Requirements for stability and icing allowances and things like that for stability books for vessels operating in northern latitudes. And yeah, it says something, maybe it's the next slide. Says something about if the vessel does not have icing allowances, it's supposed to state that in the stability book, I think. More on that when we look at stability in more detail. But we have talked often with the MCA about whether code vessels were required to comply with the MCA passenger vessel ship general requirements of lightship not changing by more than 2% of lightship and LCG position not changing by more than 1% of the length between perpendiculars. And we've never really had a very good answer about that, about whether it applied to code vessels or not. We've now got, if a vessel is modified from the condition when its stability was previously assessed to a vessel, this is any vessel, stability book stops, ISO 12217, anything. If lightship or freeboard shaped by more than 5%, the CA shall undertake a lightship or freeboard, if it's changed, beg your pardon, go back. If the vessel is modified, operator to inform the CA who shall undertake a lightship or freeboard check. If the lightship or the freeboard has changed by more than 5%, then the CA shall conduct a full stability analysis. If the vessel was done using ISO 12217, that's to be reassessed by a post-construction assessment as defined in the RCR, then the CA shall give consideration to re-examining stability information if modifications are made to a lifting device. So I'm a bit unsure about saying if freeboard or lightship have changed by more than 5%, but I guess if you've got a boat with a heel test, you don't necessarily know what the lightship is, so the only thing you can do is measure the freeboard. But measuring freeboard and freeboard changing but I say 5% is a very different thing from the lightship displacement changing by 5%. So stability to be reviewed at 20 years. Stability information not be renewed or reassessed within 20 years of initial stability assessment. So it doesn't say initial 20 years of initial coding, it's initial stability assessment. So if your boat got a boat coming into coding, or a boat that's been coded for 5 or 10 years, but it had a stability book produced 5 or 10 years before it became coded, if its stability has not been reassessed in the previous 20 years, we're back to lightship or freeboard check by practical test or calculation at the vessel's next renewal examination. So you could have 4 years to do that potentially after it's cropped up. If the lightship or freeboard data change by more than 5%, CA shall conduct full stability analysis appropriate to the intended area of operation. Yeah, so the bottom comment I think is superseded, but we've got detail of vessels not required to be issued with a stability information booklet. Tests and calculations of vessel stability shall be conducted by competent persons and results approved by the certifying authority. So vessels that don't have stability books may have a heel test, may have, depending on the boat and what's appropriate to it, may have a heel test, may have ISO 12217, either sailing or motor, may have had stops calculation, could have various other options, RORC rating certificate or whatever, detailed record of test and calculation procedure and the approved results to be kept by the certifying authority, and the maximum weight capable of being carried to be entered on the certificate. So I put a note because I'm always kind of disapproved of this, saying I assume that owners do not carry out measurement TG for stops. But stops is not going to be permitted to be used for new vessels going forward, as we'll find out in a minute. So this is just back to the point of this is just reinforcing that if ISO 12217 is used after review of the declaration of conformity and type certificate, it has to have been done for modules A1 or B with either module C, F, module B, module H. I need to look at that. I'm not quite sure that I've got that completely correct. Stability using ISO 12217, module A1 might need looked at again, but broadly speaking, it means no builder self-certification of stability has to be looked at by a notified or approved body. Stops. So one of the most convenient ways of assessing a sailing vessel's stability, if it couldn't access its ISO 12217 data or didn't have a stability book, has been using stops. An existing vessel or a vessel built before April 2002, where an appropriate numeral is already, says, available, may have its permitted area category of operation based on the RYA stops numeral. An RYA stops numeral is not accepted for vessels built after 2002. So there might be a slight grey area of conflict between definition of existing vessel for transitional purposes in that. I've put a note there. But broadly speaking, it certainly looks like stops is out for all new vessels, and we'll need to look a bit more at whether actually stops can continue to be used for anything built after April 2002. So that needs further investigation. May have its area category of operation based on stops if it's built before April 02. Not accepted for vessels after April 02. Well, there's a whole bunch of vessels out there that were built after April 02 that have their stability assessed by stops. So that does need looking at and thinking about. It's only highlighted that to myself yesterday, really. So bit of a change to vessels that require a stability information book, and that's 4.4. If it's carrying activity-related equipment where this may create a free surface effect affecting stability. That's really the main point of putting that in. And also fitted with a lifting device. A lifting device does not include personal retrieval systems, vessels' own anchoring equipment, or tender davits, assuming the CA accepts these do not have a detrimental effect on stability. And a small tender on a big yacht is probably going to be fine on its davit. If you've got bloody great big davit on a small boat lifting something heavy that says it's a tender or says it's got a 200 kilo anchor, that might need thinking about a bit differently. So there are other changes to the stability book requirements. There are changes in various areas to do with damage stability, towing, other areas that we really haven't looked at in full detail yet, and that we will need to do and come back on a separate session for those that are interested in stability books, not more everyone else that has with it. Yeah. Minimum freeboard. ISO 12217 compliance. The code tables of freeboard for a motor vessel, not stepped or open boat, or calculation under merchant shipping load line regulations. So the point I'm just making here is that at 2, the requirement for average freeboard has been removed in the code. The MCA are still discussing that and asking for input from certifying authorities. So we think there's every chance they're going to bring it back in the end. And it doesn't make any logical sense that if you've got a boat with a straight unstepped deck, it for some reason needs extra freeboard and extra reserve of buoyancy, which is what freeboard's all about. And if you decide put a step in your deck, you can somehow just have it lower and have less reserve of buoyancy and less safety margin. No logic to it. There was logic to average freeboard because it maintained the same level of reserve of buoyancy. So we are waiting for MCA to conclude what they're going to do about that. Freeboard marks are basically back in. So I'll put detail here of what the freeboard marks are for vessels carrying 1,000 kilos or less and not ribs, etc. But basically freeboard marking is back. Freeboard marking for vessels carrying over a ton of activity-related equipment. Both require freeboard calculated in accordance with the merchant shipping load line regulation. That's quite complicated, and there are about 30 different formula you have to refer to, and you can't really do it without having a stability book. We have been pulled up in audit quite a few times in the last few years by MCA saying that we had stability books which did not have this freeboard calculation in them, and asking for it. We've had to go back and get it done on a few boats. If your boat is carrying over a ton, it doesn't just need its freeboard calculated in this manner, it also needs draft marks at bow and stern on both sides. That's just giving some detail of what the marks are. Left with 2 L's. Sailing vessel with a stability book, but not under ISO 12217, requires a freeboard mark, and the draft permitted for stability shall not be greater than the draft at which the maximum draft or displacement at which scantlings have been approved, and that's not a change, that's just thrown in there for information. Sailing vessel freeboard mark hasn't changed, that's what it is. So various drills come into this code that owners have to conduct. Life raft launching drill is one to be done in compliance or renewal examinations, or when any changes are made to the life raft type or capacity. So you could, in theory, have a life raft changes. The owner is supposed to tell you, because he's supposed to tell you when he makes any changes. If he's changed it for a different type of life raft, you could be required to attend and witness a life raft launching drill, or you could perhaps reasonably decide that you could see the life raft was different but sufficiently similar that the previous drill was still applicable. And we don't have to get them to throw it in the water and inflate it, fortunately. Life jacket spray hoods has been quite topical in discussion about this code. So in 001, vessels shall carry an appropriate spray hood for each life jacket on board which is compatible with spray hoods. So there was quite a lot of discussion about vessels, for example, which carried Department of Trade foam, big bulky life jackets for safety purposes. They weren't worn as working life jackets. They were just the permitted emergency life jackets. Those generally can't have a spray hood fitted. But if the life jackets on the vessel are of a type which can have a spray hood, then the owner now has to carry one. And the MCA have kindly noted that vessels in area 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, which are not required to have an appropriate spray hood, may choose to have one, should they wish to. Life jacket servicing details have changed a little bit. It changed in the consultation version, and it's changed again in this version. But as far as I can see, what it basically means is that we're back to inflatable life jackets require annual servicing. But the certificate for life jacket servicing is only required to be submitted to the certifying authority of compliance or renewal examinations. I would probably still want to see that when I'm doing my annual surveys on boats that require annual survey and intermediate, but I don't now have to submit it to the certifying authority. Various changes to search and rescue location devices, not all detailed in this spreadsheet. I have a separate document which has kind of clarified, hopefully a bit more easy to understand, the EPIRB requirements from the code that's in the package that will go out following this session. But there are requirements for vessels that operate outside areas covered by dedicated search and rescue assets. Additional requirements for SARTs. Closing machinery spaces in the event of a fire. Following shall be capable of being stopped from outside or remotely to a machinery space. So no longer just having to be able to stop the engines from outside the machinery space. You now have to be able to stop any fans that are in the machinery space, any fans feeding the machinery space, any pumps if the vessel has day fuel tanks or oil tanks, and there are any pumps, transfer pumps, manual or electric pumps transferring fuel from bilge or wing tanks into day tanks, any centrifuges or any other equipment that may increase the risk of fire acceleration. So, pardon me, all of those have to have a means of stopping from outside the machinery space in the event of fire. If engine room fans are automatic, which stop in the event of fire, there has to be a manual override for that. So a switch outside or something of that nature. So this is what I was talking about when we go back to further up in this PowerPoint. We talked about valves on seawater houses within engine rooms. Only category 0 or 1 required to have that valve operable from outside the engine space. In category 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, it could be located outside the engine space. When you look at that again, go back to it, but this links together here. So linkages forming part of remote operation for flaps, cutoffs, and similar devices to be fire resistant construction and unlikely to fail in the event of fire. So what are operators presenting us with to show that they can shut a valve from outside the space? You certainly can't have a bit of rope on a pool. You probably can have a bit of wire on a pool. Is a stop cable or a Morse cable acceptable? I'm not quite sure. We need to have a think about whether that would comply or not. They are commonly used, but they can burn in a fire and they can stop working if they burn in a fire. So what constitutes fire resistant? Need to think about that. Engine room insulation. Quite a lot of changes here that we'll need to look at in a bit more detail separately and come back about. Vessel constructed of steel, machinery space boundaries contiguous with accommodation spaces, stores, or other areas identified to have an increased risk of fire shall be insulated, basically with fireproof insulation. Vessel constructed of aluminium shall be assessed by the certifying authority as to whether it requires additional insulation requirements where high heat items pass through hull, decks, or bulkheads. That whole section we will have to look at in more detail and come back with more information about. Transition vessels don't have to meet that at the minute. And if they don't have insulation, no requirement to fit insulation. But if a machinery space is significantly modified on an existing vessel, to the extent where fitting insulation is possible and deemed necessary by the certifying authority, then the insulation used shall meet the required standards. Gas cooker safe distances have increased, some of them. And that has been balanced by materials which are closer than prescribed to an open flame appliance shall be either non-combustible or have a surface finish class 1 spread of flame rating which has been tested in accordance with a recognized standard. So more detail again as to what is satisfactory and what complies in terms of safe distances around cookers or open flame gas appliances, and what constitutes non-combustible materials if they are closer. Additional fire detection requirements spelled out. Machinery spaces, accommodation spaces, all spaces containing open flame gas, liquid fuel appliances, all spaces where electrical equipment or installations may pose a risk of fire, any other spaces identified by the CA as being at risk from fire. So they're talking about areas that might be at risk. So assessing an area that might be at risk requires a risk assessment. So that probably needs to be part of the vessel safety management system. And then we can have a look at how all that balances together with the requirement for fire detectors. If a vessel meets the appropriate ISO regulations and has been verified by an approved or notified body, or if an existing sister vessel in the same or lesser sea area may be accepted as evidence, well, means of escape we're talking about, beg your pardon. So means of escape, all the previous requirements exist, but there are now some additional options insofar as if a vessel is complying with all the relevant ISOs and there is documentation to prove that, and it's been approved by a notified body, and that is different from the MCA requirements for escapes. You can accept that. And you can also accept if it's proven on a sister vessel, but you have to know that it was proven. And same or lesser sea area means not a lesser number as in 1 or 0, but less distance to sea. So if you're doing it for, yeah, all right. Multi-hull escape hatches. Various requirements for when escape hatches are required, upright and inverted water lines and alternative means of complying. So that needs looked at in detail. I'm just drawing attention to the issues surrounding it are a little bit different in this code now. Fire control and safety plans required for various vessels and recommended for all other vessels. Fire appliances and fixed firefighting. So I could look at the yellow-blue workboat codes. Pardon me. I can look at the yellow-blue workboat codes for MGN 280 and very quickly work out what fire extinguishing a vessel required. I'm going to have to sit down and probably spend another 2 hours going through the fire extinguishing section of this code and extract what it actually means and put it into a manner I can understand. So I'm not sure it necessarily is any more onerous on the operator, but it's definitely more difficult for the surveyor and the operator to understand what is required and needs careful looking at and thinking about. CO2 extinguishers, just as a part of that. Now, limits on what you can have, maximum 1 in any accommodation space, only permitted where there is a risk of electrical fire, maximum extinguisher weight 2 kilos. Alarms for discharge of fixed firefighting medium. So it's always been the case that CO2 systems required alarms on discharge of firefighting medium. We've now got where a fixed firefighting system automatically disperses extinguishing media into a machinery space, and there is a risk of persons entering the machinery space when the extinguishing media is being dispersed, irrespective of whether it's CO2 or anything else. There shall be a visual alarm displayed outside the machinery space or an operating procedure that prevents persons entering the space, and logically tells them to get out if they're already in there. That won't apply to unmanned spaces, but it will apply to potentially manned spaces and where there is a risk of persons entering the space. So even if you're saying it is a normally unmanned space, if people can go into it, then fixed firefighting alarms, pre-discharge alarms. Radio communications. Various changes. Haven't fully digested them all, not all listed here. That note that carries requirements by GMDSS series is a blooming complicated table setting out requirements for radios, PLBs, EPIRBs, NAVTECs, additional requirements and recommendations over and above colored codes in MGN 280. We'll probably need to look at that again in a separate session. Ship radio survey. So it's become a requirement under the workboat code. It's being recommended here. Where a vessel fitted with GMDSS radio equipment, vessel owner operator recommended to undertake a survey of the radio installation every 5 years. So, as the CA and the surveyor, who can perhaps take a view on whether recommended is okay not to have it, but some of the vessels we look at that have quite complex radio installations, you're probably going to be saying the sensible thing is to get a radio survey done, and then you as a surveyor and the CA can be satisfied that the system meets requirements. Navigation equipment in area categories 0, 1, and 2. issues to do with radar and radar at speeds over 30 knots, and where radar is equipped with automatic target tracking, then suitable transmitting heading device shall be fitted. Existing vessels transitioning do not need to fit radar. I might need to clarify that, actually. That's what it says and what I've extracted from the code. But there are vessels that are required to have radar, and whether a vessel is going to have radar or not, it now becomes relevant, because if you are required to have radar, or if you are not required to have radar but do have radar, then you need to undertake approved radar training, and approved radar training has potential administration and cost issues. Maritime Labour Convention, we're not going through here, just drawing attention to the fact that all the requirements are now in the code. Health and safety at work, I've just thrown this in. Owners and operators of vessels where crew are employed on board shall ensure compliance with the requirements of merchant shipping fishing vessels' health and safety at work regulations as amended. So kind of raises the question for me as to whether a CA or code surveyor is being expected to assess a vessel for compliance with health and safety regulations. That will probably come out in the wash as being wrapped up in the safety management system. The owner will have to ensure that what his obligations are covered in his safety management system, and then the MCA are going to tidy up what we have to do about sampling, I think is the word that's being used, a safety management system as distinct from auditing it. So bulwarks, guardrails, handrails, the key point is that the RCD, RCR requirements are now embodied into the code. And if we have in the RCD, RCR certifications approved by approved or notified body, that the vessel deck handrails are approved, and that would, I think, be under ISO 15085. We can accept that. It no longer requires a vessel by vessel equivalence application to the MCA when using this code. Rib seating, open boat, inflatable boat with a buoyant collar. Persons shall only sit on designated inboard seats and excludes gunnels or tubes. Individual inboard forward-facing seating for all persons on board allow them to effectively brace and provide lateral support located so that persons avoid the greatest load shocks. That's not just small boats, and it's not just ribs. Open boat. So we've had 45-foot boats that are essentially open boats. They might have a space below deck, a couple of berths or something, but persons are on deck at all times when operating the boat. And what kind of seating, and is it okay? And if the boat can do 30, 40, 50 knots, then what's required in terms of shock absorbent seating, securing people in place, handrails, hand grabs, can be quite tricky sometimes. MGN 436 and the RYA thrill rides and whatever it's called guide are both quite relevant and are referred to by the MCA and the MAIB in their discussions about all this. But the key thing is that it says the maximum number of passengers on a certificate is not to exceed the number of suitable seats. There's a whole lot of detail about tenders and daughter craft, and that I'm not going into here, but different types of tender, different operational restrictions and allowances, risk assessment requirements, and requirements on the motherships. Operator training. So mandatory training courses. Mandatory training courses set out in table 5.3. 4. Personal survival techniques, or RYA basic sea survival. first aid training, firefighting training, radar training, stability training, electronic chart systems training. We'll come on to electronic chart systems, but that means something specific. Training for navigation equipment in excess of code requirements. So if you've got a lot of expensive, complicated kit that isn't part of the requirement, but it's there, you have to be trained to use it. Catering training. So from the table, I've extracted in a manner that's easier for me to understand. First aid training. MLC compliant vessels. Why not put that bit in? And MLC compliant vessels and non-MLC vessels operating in area category 0 or 1. Minimum of one person on board who's in charge of medical care and administering medicine as part of their regular duties, or minimum one person on board competent to provide medical first aid and hold the relevant STCW certificate. So there's a whole lot more MCA documentation about medical stores, particularly for vessels in sea area 0 or 1, and where they are Cat B or Cat A medical stores, and how those stores are managed, and the requirement for just that managing and recording the management of that on board the vessel for your more common 60 miles from Safe Haven Cat 2 vessel with its category C medical kit. It's going to be less important. But the master shall hold a proficiency in medical care unless another member of the crew holds medical or nursing qualifications. So that's all MLC compliant and Cat 0 or 1. Firefighting training. Vessels up to 15 meters in length. Master or at least one crew member complete an MCA approved one-day firefighting course, SDCW fire prevention firefighting course, or MCA approved or recognized training course. Under 15 meters in length, master or one crew member and at least one crew member complete an MCA approved one-day firefighting course, blah, blah, blah. So differences over and under 15 meters. Radar training. Vessels carrying radar. Master and all crew responsible for a navigation watch or complete an MCA approved recognized radar training course. Stability training. Vessels required to be provided with stability information book. Master should have completed an MCA approved stability course. So electronic chart system training. Vessels carrying electronic chart systems. So in the pack we're going to send out following this, there is a copy of MGN 319, which is introducing small vessel electronic chart systems, which were allowed to be approved from something like June or July last year, which is a follow-on from the fishing vessel Mini Ectis approval that was going on for years before that. So for a vessel which meets its carriage of charts requirements by using small vessel electronic chart systems in lieu of paper charts, owners and operators are required to undertake the relevant training. If it's a vessel which is still using paper charts and has some electronic gear on board as part of its aid to navigation, then to my understanding, you are not required, or the operator is not required to undertake that training. But in all cases, masters and crew shall undertake on-board familiarization training with the specific equipment of the vessel. So, as the surveyor, do we then have to see evidence of that having been done? It's probably part of the safety management system again. If there's additional navigation equipment, training in use of that equipment, for example, if it has full Ectis, you need proper training for it. catering training where appropriate. No. Hold on. Okay, we have flashed through all that. These are just some silly pictures. Accident reporting. This guy had his bridge alarm turned off and quite a lot of booze under his belt. That was the result of it. That's a boat I had surveyed prior to this happening. It's in the Channel Islands somewhere. Interesting things happen. Keep a good lookout. Unfortunate sailing incidents. Strange things happen. I have looked at and repaired boats like that. That's Loch Lomond. Somebody drove up onto the golf course. So I'm going to, so we've got 20 minutes left. We have gone through all that because there wasn't any questions. So we're going to have them later. So that's all good. I'm going to stop sharing that screen and open a couple of other documents.
Whilst you're doing that, Fraser, and thank you to those who have posted questions, we'll pick those up later. You haven't touched on the new SCV2 form. I think from what you told me, it's a bit more challenging. It's a much bigger form. Is there anything you could perhaps just say for people who've yet to really explore the new SCV2?
Have you got a new SCV2 without our logo on it up there?
Yeah, yep, it's on screen.
Let me see if I can make it a bit bigger. So I have not used this yet, I have to say, but it's pretty much the same format as the one they produced for the new workboat code, which I have used. And one of the first things about it that I found is that when you come to all the various tick boxes, they're extremely sensitive, and it's really easy to tick all the boxes correctly, move on to the next section, just happen to float your cursor over a box you've already ticked or not ticked, and it'll change it. So you have to be bloody careful using the form. So for those that haven't looked at this yet, it's available on the IIMS website. People that are approved by IIMS will be able to get in and see it. People from other certifying authorities will be able to see it with their own logo on it. Same form. So story is that certifying authorities all had different SCV2 forms. Owners and certifying authorities kept telling the MCA that they should produce a form themselves so it would all be standard and all be the same. The MCA finally did that. In my opinion, they have not done it awfully well. The form is much more cumbersome and much more difficult to work with than any of the previous certifying authorities' forms. And to my mind, whether the MCA like it or not, it's been written by somebody that knows all the rules, knows what to put in the form, but is not accustomed to either completing the forms or scrutineering and checking the forms. Because lots of the ways the questions are asked and the ways that they are answered make it very difficult for a scrutineer not to have to go back and ask lots of other questions, because it just says, does something comply, yes or no? You've got no evidence of how it complies. But contacts and information, does it have a lifting device? Does it tow? Is it a police boat? Is it fuel transfer? Well, a pilot boat, I don't see how it can be a pilot boat if it's under sport and pleasure code. Operating in ice areas has to be defined. Single-handed operations has to be defined. Cargo carry more than a ton has to be defined. Water tank with a deck, permanent accommodation space. Various options. If I take a box off that, if I tick that box. Well, maybe it's not, we would have done something different with this, but it's quite easy. Just have to be careful with the boxes. How the questions are asked, there's probably quite a lot of them a bit different. You have to think about it a bit to be sure you're giving the answer that correctly describes the vessel. Is it built under load line authority? Is it not built under load line authority? Not built under the survey of a load lining assigning authority. Meets hull construction standards for small vessels. Meets a standard provided in MGA 704 RCR Module B. So demonstrating compliance with ISO 12215 through the use of these modules, or hull certifications for small craft provided in MIN 724. Individual vessel demonstrable record of at least 5 years history of maintenance and safe operation. Individual vessel is a sister vessel, which we talked about in the PowerPoint. I'm not sure there's much to say about this form other than it's quite different and will take a bit of familiarization with, and will take considerably longer to complete and to scrutineer than some of the certifying authorities' own forms that were being used previously. Ports, motor vessels, sailing vessels, propulsion systems, assuming it's the same as the workboat code form. Some of the things I don't like about it, doesn't ask you to say anywhere what the engines actually are, make, model, or whatever. I don't think it does. But if they change, you have to record that. But if you're the surveyor going to the vessel and you're taking with you the previous SCV2 that somebody else did, and it doesn't tell you what the engines were, how the hell do you know if it's changed? Shutting down machinery, fuel pipes, date fitted, renewal date. So we didn't talk about this, but high pressure fuel pipes and associated fitting have been installed to reduce risk of oil mist fires. So that is part of it. So that's either dual wall fuel pipes or shielding or combinations of these things. And that will apply now on potentially quite small diesel engines that will have common rail diesel high pressure fuel lines. So fuel tank is constructed and installed to an appropriate standard, yes or no? A fuel tank is constructed of a fuel and corrosion resistant material, yes or no? If I'm the scrutineer, that's not telling me what the fuel tank's made of. It'd be very helpful if just had a box that said stainless steel, aluminium, molded in GRP, whatever the hell. But that's because the people that wrote the form aren't used to checking them. All the stuff. So it's just wording cut and pasted from the codes, some of it in more succinct manner and stuck into the form. Noise and vibration. field of vision meets the ISO or not. What is it? It's 43 pages, this form.
I'm going to say that form is depressing me.
It's 43 pages. And it's the same form. So I actually looked at this to see, I presume it will have the rigid inflatable section in it because the SWB2 produced for Workboat 3 had the rigid inflatable section added into it, and it is there now. So this 43-page form is what you have to use for a 5.5-meter rib, 24-foot open tayboat, or Sunseeker 84 potentially. So for the bigger, more complex vessels, most of it will be relevant, but for the smaller ones, a lot of it wouldn't be. And then as a scrutineer, you're doing a lot of fighting through the form, even as a surveyor, you're doing a lot of fighting through the form to find out what bits are actually relevant to be filled in. Anyway, so SCV2 form. I've got 10 minutes to go, so I want to just look at a couple of other things. I'm going to close this and share a couple of other documents. So I'm not going to look at this in detail, but just going to have a quick look at it. So this is just basically I have extracted for my benefit from this Sport or Pleasure Code the Appendix 7 Safety Management System requirements. Some of this is going to be relevant to surveyors, all of it's going to be relevant to operators. You've got a safety management system requirement that has 12 lots of requirements. General safety management system shall include 1 to 9, health and safety, environmental protection policy, risk assessment for safe working of all operations, roles and responsibilities, master's responsibilities, crew, owner, operator, charterers. 462 is relevant. Charterers of a vessel on a skipper charter are not subject to the requirements of 9 to 11 of this appendix. You've got the designated person ashore requirement. You've got details of what they've got to be able to do. You've got training and qualifications of personnel. You've got emergency drills. You've got mooring, unmooring, various other things. Vessel standard operating procedures. You've got safety briefing requirements. You've got emergency clear procedures for responding to emergency situations shall be understood and include fire, flooding, grounding, violent act, man overboard, abandoned ship. So how many of those are there required to be drills for? Probably all of them at some point or other. How many are we as a certifying authority required to witness either in person or remotely? It's another question we'll come to. Roles and responsibilities of all persons, reporting accidents, maintenance and vessel equipment, cyber security. So cyber security not very important on our open rip with no computers or PCs or anything. Might be much more important on vessels with a lot of connectivity. Review and continuous improvement of the safety management system. So that's probably what's got to be in the safety management system. So what I don't know for sure yet, but I think I have a fairly good idea about, is what the MCA are going to expect as surveyors to check in the safety management system. And that is probably going to be pretty much the same as what they have put in MGN 710 for safety management system of small workboats and pilot boats. So let me just share the screen again. So for workboats and pilot boats, the MCA wrote into the new MCA contract that those vessels require safety management systems, that certifying authorities will be required to audit and review those safety management systems, and specifically they wrote into the contract that certifying authorities would require to demonstrate their competence to review and audit those safety management systems, and would then be approved by the MCA to do that. And some of the pre-contract discussions with the MCA certifying authorities all kind of balked at that a bit, because we're saying we're signing up to a contract to do with something that you haven't approved us to even be allowed to do yet. But that's what the contract said, and that's what we signed up to. We have, as IIMS, gone through detailed training and familiarization with surveyors and our scrutineers on safety management systems. We've circulated the MCA's draft forms for auditing a safety management system. We've updated all our internal procedures to show how we would deal with all that. The MCA then decided, after lots of complaints, that they would backtrack on that as fast as they could. To my mind, they have not done that in a very proper fashion. But this MGN 710 sets out how they have started trying to backtrack, and it will probably be much the same for Sport and Pleasure Code. So they've not backtracked at all on the requirements for the operators to have and implement the safety management system. What they backtracked on is the requirement for a certifying authority and surveyors to inspect that. And they have said, broadly speaking, that we are not now required to audit the safety management system, but that we are required to sample it. What the difference between sampling and auditing is, I don't quite know yet. I've asked that question and not had a very good answer as far as I'm concerned. We've got an Annex A now, which is a self-assessment form that owners and operators may use to demonstrate safety management system implementation. And that's basically an audit form for them to do their own audit of their own safety management system. So that certifying authority and surveyors are then required to sample that in some manner or other. That is not supposed to be an audit, but we're still being told that we have to be satisfied that the safety management system is fit for purpose. So all vessels under WB3, and I think this is going to come out much the same for Sport or Pleasure, required to implement a safety management system proportionate to the size, complexity, risk profile of their operation. So for this workboat code, which came into force in 2023, they had to do that by 26. So I would anticipate that operators, and we have discussed that with the MCA, and they have said the same thing will apply. I would anticipate that this is 25, so I'd anticipate it might be 28 before Sport or Pleasure Code operators are required to implement fully this safety management system. That 3 years goes past quite quickly. So it talks about whether a vessel holds certification under ISM, demonstration of safety management. You'll be able to demonstrate the safety management system implemented on board. Primary method for demonstrating safety management is a self-assessment. Owner can choose alternative methods. Self-assessment is the means. Other methods. So we need to watch this space and see what comes out following from this MGN 710. we've got non-conformities, major non-conformities, points for improvement, but how you find all that? Role of the certifying authority. CA is responsible for providing independent assurance that the owner-operator has implemented an SMS. CA does this by sampling the operator's self-assessment or an alternative method of demonstrating the safety management system. Strictly assurance-based does not extend to producing, consulting, or auditing in detail. Maintains the CA's independence. Sampling is intended to be brief and focused, does not assess the effectiveness of the SMS. Sampling verifies that the demonstration accurately reflects the implementation in practice. What the hell does that mean? CA's sample, when based on self-assessment, should focus on items explicitly referenced in the self-assessment. So some items may require brief follow-up, such as asking how the response was determined. So we have to do sampling, we might have to follow up, but we're not doing auditing. So we'll ignore the remote operating vehicles bit. We'll go on to having a quick look at the self-assessment form, because surveyors will have to see that. So this is still, what it will be in a minute when I've shared the screen, this is still the self-assessment form as we have it for workboat code vessels. So this is MGN 710 Annex A workboat self-assessment. I imagine sport or pleasure code will be similar. Various questions that the owner is supposed to ask himself, put a tick box in yes, no, or indifferent, a finding, a comment, or actions. Training, drills, maintenance, equipment, feedback, and improvement, signed by the owner operator. So, in a minute, all we can say is we imagine that a similar process is going to be required. Personally, I think the whole thing's a bit of a fudge as far as the auditing or sampling or whatever is concerned, but we just have to go forward with it and work out just exactly that, how that's going to happen. But it is whatever degree or depth of sampling surveyors and certifying authority have to do, it is going to involve a certain amount more work, more training, and more familiarization with what the whole process is about. And that's got to cost more time and more money. So I've gone through the code and extracted everywhere I can find that it makes a reference to risk assessment. There are quite a lot, but not as many as the sport and pleasure code. Where I've put a yellow highlight, it is where it says that the risk assessment. So we've got risk assessment of operations, risk assessment intended for appropriate for the intended operation shall be carried out to ensure any circumstances, local conditions, equipment, blah, 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 adequately considered and all known risks are mitigated. This shall be presented to the certifying authority. So they present it to us. Do we open it? Do we read it? Do we comment on it? Who knows? New risk assessment required to be conducted if a vessel's certificated area of operation changes, the vessel is converted for change in operational use, has an additional piece of equipment fitted, shall include the assessment of any previously accepted equivalent arrangements. Risk assessment of all persons on board shall be carried out by the vessel owner operator. Portable carbon dioxide fire extinguishers exceeding 2 kg may be considered on a case-by-case basis, subject to submission to and satisfactory acceptance by the certifying authority. So that specifically says that if they've got a CO2 extinguisher bigger than 2 kg, needs a risk assessment, needs to be presented to us, and we need to accept it or not. It's video installation, batteries, bulwark handrails and guardrails. Additional handrails shall be fitted for where handrails, guardrails would mitigate any risk identified or by appropriate risk assessment to the satisfaction of the certifying authority. So there's an area there where we're required to see and accept risk assessments, except that if they are part of the safety management system, we're not required to look at them in detail. We're only required to sample them and not see whether they're satisfactory or not. There's a whole range of conflicts going on here in what we're being told, but it will come out in the wash. So this is to do with medical stores, I think, risk assessment to the satisfaction of the CA. Risk assessments for daughter or tender craft launching, lower regulations. Daughter craft shall have a risk assessment presented to the certifying authority as part of their examinations prior to issuing or renewing the certificate. So we've got to have the risk assessment before issuing the certificate. Does the risk assessment have to be any good? Does it have to be, who knows? Vessels operating at specific risk appropriate carriage of activity related equipment, lifting, towing, high speed or planing mode operations, risk assessment shall be presented to the certifying authority. So you're not allowed to have seating on the gunnels or tubes, but if such seating is on the gunnels or tubes, the vessel operator shall put in place appropriate mitigations for all risks, and the risk assessment shall be to the satisfaction of the certifying authority. So maybe there is a tiny wedge of a window there where in some cases, if the boat was only doing 6 knots ever and it was only going across a flat water river, you might be able to say that there was a risk assessment, the owner could argue the case, the CA could accept it. But in most circumstances, a risk assessment is not good to be able to demonstrate that risks of sitting on tubes are mitigated adequately. Diving operations. So, owner of a vessel engaged in carriage of passengers at high speed or planing mode shall have and implement a risk assessment, shall include mitigating actions for a whole list of things, and including, for example, risks associated with seating passengers in the forward 1/3 of the vessel length. So at one point in developing this code, they were going to say that passenger people were not allowed to sit in the forward 1/3 of a rigid and flexible. They've stepped back from that by saying, well, you can do that, but you have to have a risk assessment. The owner or managing agent shall detail how these risks are mitigated in his safety management system. It doesn't say whether the certifying authority is supposed to receive that or accept it. It's just got to be in the safety management system. We don't quite yet know exactly how much looking at that we're really supposed to do. Inboard forward facing seating is located. Risk assessment shall be carried out to the satisfaction of the certifying authority. So that's fairly clear. You've got to be satisfied. So there's a whole array of areas where they said in the PowerPoint, risk assessments, some just have to be submitted, some we have to consider, some we have to decide whether we're approving or not, and some the owner just has to have, and it doesn't say we have to look at them. It's all a bit of a bugger's muddle, but that's what it is. So I had a few people coming in asking me what the hell the requirements for EPIRBs and SARTs and things in the Sport and Pleasure Code actually meant. And when I looked at the code, I couldn't really easily work it out myself. So I produced this little document for my own benefit, which hopefully will be of use. You do need to read it in association with the code, in case I've got anything wrong, but it does seem to be a bit clearer presentation than the way the code is done. Float for your launching, the method of launching the EPIRB. What do we need in the way of EPIRBs? Personal emergency radio devices or SART for category 6543210 or 0. R is recommended and 1 or 2, yes or no. So it's worth having a look at this in association with the way the code is presented. I think there's something, I think the way the code table is done, some of the headings are in the wrong places, in the wrong columns. It's just not printed or out very well in the PDF version. But that will hopefully be useful. Stop showing that. How do you think we're doing for time, Mike?
I think we're probably there, Fraser. We're losing a few people now with people dropping off. So if you're happy to call it a wrap there.
Yeah, so I've put in with the pack of stuff that you guys are going to send out, the MGN 319 small vessel electronic charts, which is from January last year, but you could only accept them from June or July last year. There's a small vessel electronic chart performance standard that the other equipment manufacturers are required to sign up to, and we're supposed to see that if we're accepting that and put all that in this pack of information. And it's a huge amount to try and take in a very short period of time, and lots of sections of it we will, as you and I discussed earlier today, might have to come back and do shorter, punchier versions on. But I hope this very quick run through it all has been of some use and benefit to people.
Fraser, I think it absolutely has. And, I appreciate you for taking the time to put this together. And I know you're doing a repeat performance tomorrow as well, albeit for an hour, not over 2 hours. Just a couple of things I think that I just wanted to add. You touched on cost several times. I don't know that anybody's really factored in here the extra cost that this is going to burden various people with, actually. So we can't address that now, but I mean, I think it is a concern. You mentioned training, absolutely. Just to confirm what Fraser said, that we will put together over the course of, I don't know, the next year, 18 months, a whole series of trainings, picking off some of the more specific areas that we think people need to know about. So rest assured that will happen. And I think that's really it, isn't it? The other thing I did want to say, actually, Fraser, because we've already had the first implementation meeting with the MCA. We actually didn't attend it because they forgot to seemingly include us in the distribution list. We weren't the only CA not to be there, but we didn't get to that one. But we do have dates now. Every 2 months they are holding a meeting, and I think those will be well attended. And this is where the sort of areas, Fraser, that you said, further information required, that's where we can take that and bring these things up. Another part, of course, the MCA are always at the end of the phone, sometimes very helpful, sometimes I guess not so helpful. It depends on the question. But Fraser, big thanks, many thanks, much appreciated. And thank you to everybody who's been online. Just give us a few days to get all this together. We'll have a video to send to you, which obviously helps. We'll have Fraser's PowerPoint, and we'll get the other documents that Fraser's prepared as well. So thank you very much. And just to respond to Fred, Fred, your comment is an interesting one. Fred was asking whether or not IIMS could get some kind of special deal on ISO standards, because he believes there are 70 ISO standards referenced in that new code. That's a lot of money if you've got to buy 70 ISO standards. I can't guarantee anything, but I'm more than happy to have a dialogue and see what we might be able to do. So if you've got more questions, fire them in. If not, then don't worry. I promise you we'll get through the questions that have been raised as well tonight over the coming days and get back to you. So once again, thank you, Fraser. Thank you to everybody online, and we'll see you all again soon.